This is a short reel.
Hi, this is Charles, and joining us tonight, fresh from a trip to the Philippines in search of deleted scenes from lost Wig films, is Ryan. Welcome back, sir.
I'm back.
And did you find anything?
No.
I don't think there are any deleted scenes from Wig films.
No, I think they're all out there.
I think everything that was shot is on the screen.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, it's all out there.
So speaking of the Philippines, right? Tonight, just like a couple of bricklayers, we're going to build on the films that we talked about, one of which I think was filmed in the Philippines.
Yes.
Right? Enter the Ninja. But tonight we're going to talk about the company that made those movies, the Canon Film Group. So join us as we look at the rise and fall of the Canon Group in the documentary Electric Boogaloo.
Our agent Marty Baum said, look, if you guys want to just go make a film and be totally left alone, there are two new guys in town.
Menachem Golan and Yoram Globus were the heavyweights. They were the George Foremans and the Muhammad Alis of the indie market.
Yoram Globus was the businessman behind the movie making.
Where is my money? You promise and promise and promise and you're not paying.
Menachem Golan was the movie maker.
He redubbed me with an American voice, but not a voice similar to mine.
A true ninja doesn't kill. He eliminates, and only for defensive purposes.
He's so not ninja.
I don't know. I've never seen a ninja.
The audience wasn't prepared for the craziness, the looniness. I felt a little stupid doing it.
Clyde the orangutan came to the office. Menachem's deciding whether to sign the orangutan to put him under contract.
It was crazy, talking to a monkey.
This will be an epic of cinema.
Blockbuster of the century.
Oh, God, we are in so much trouble.
And that's why everybody...
They put a stamp on pop culture.
It's hard to say words Canon films without laughing.
At the end of the movie, I had tears in my eyes.
Menachem, he says, aha, I got you. I was crying because I saw my career going down the toilet and I didn't know what I was going to do next.
I hold them in huge affection, even though they ruined our movie.
While we were talking about Enter the Ninja and its kind of sort of sequel, Revenge of the Ninja, last week, we spoke quite a bit about Menachem Golan, the director of the first film, and at that time, one of the owners of the studio that produced them, the Canon Group, along with his cousin Yoram Globus. Even though the Canon Group had been around since the late 60s, Golan and Globus bought the company in 1979 for what amounted to a song. Even for that time period, $500,000 for a film company with a catalog is not too bad.
Right.
Prior to Golan and Globus taking control, the biggest hit that the company had was probably the movie Joe, an old man angst against hippies picture starring Peter Boyle and directed by John G. Avildsen. And they have been making and distributing movies from foreign filmmakers as well, like Jodorowsky's Fando and Lis, and I think there was another movie called Inga, which was a foreign film, and it kind of had that foreign film quote-unquote prestige, but it was really just like a lot of nude women.
Sure. Supposed to be artistic nudity, but it was just straight up softcore porn, it looked like.
Well, it was in black and white, so automatically it's artistic.
Sure.
But they mostly made low-budget B-movies like the Happy Hooker series. Likewise, Golan and Globus had been producing films in their native Israel before coming to the United States. Their most popular film was a film called Lemon Popsicle, which was basically a teen sex dramedy that was actually nominated for Best Foreign Language Film at the 1979 Golden Globes. It lost to Bergman's Autumn Sonata, but it's interesting, like, taking that into account when talking about what Golan and Globus did with the Cannon Group when they came to the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Because it seemed like then after that, once they came to the United States, they were kind of in search of that prestige, supposedly, with their films that they had enjoyed somewhat in Israel.
Right.
And they never really quite got there.
Right.
It seemed like their eyes were bigger than their stomach.
Yeah.
You know?
Pretty much all the time. Actually.
Yeah. Well,
couldn't get enough to eat.
Well, yeah, when you say that, like, this Brooke Shields film Sahara is going to win the Academy Award. When you say something like that, you can definitely tell that somebody's reach is exceeding their grasp, you know? Like,
one could also make the case that saying this Brooke Shields movie is going to win an Oscar alone is kind of a curse.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, she's good in certain kinds of films,
right.
You know? But we should back up. Like, let's get into this movie, Electric Boogaloo, a little bit. This documentary about Cannon films, which is itself kind of structured like a Cannon film in that it kind of goes all over the place, and then it kind of comes back, and then it kind of...
Part of that could be blamed for the fact that Brett Ratner's one of the producers, too.
Right. I thought it was really kind of appropriate that he was the producer of this documentary about these guys.
Yeah.
Which kind of celebrates them in a way, I guess.
Yeah.
Most of the interviewees in this movie come off like battered spouses to me or something.
Yeah.
You know, where they kind of say something that's honest about Golan and Globus, but then they kind of temper that with, but they led with their heart, and how can you hate somebody who does that?
They're total scumbags who scarred me, but I owe my career to them.
Right, exactly. Or they basically pissed in the pool as far as big budget films are concerned, that we're still kind of feeling the ramifications of it today.
Right.
But they love movies, so how can you blame them? Like, I get to the point where I get kind of tired of hearing somebody say, well, he was a character. And I'm just kind of like, oh, you misspelled asshole in that comment, you know? Like,
yeah.
So what's your, okay, do you remember the first Cannon film that you saw?
Probably one of the Chuck Norris movies, if I remember correctly. I do know that, going back to Lemon Popsicle, that is there's an American remake of that called The Last American Virgin,
right?
Which apparently is almost shot-for-shot remake.
Right.
And I do remember seeing that when I was a kid, too. And I remember how strange it was seeing that movie, number one, because it was just straight-up sex.
Yeah.
You know, for an hour and a half or whatever. But I remember it having like a bummer ending to it. And that really stood out to me. It's like, wow, all these teenage movies that I was seeing at the time, whether they were too old for me or not, they always had some kind of cool ending to them or happy ending to them or something like that. This was a straight up bummer ending. You know, it was the guy gets his heart broken, and the end of the movie is him driving away to sad music and him crying in the car, basically. And I was like, wow, okay.
Yeah.
And for that reason alone, I thought, well, you know, this wasn't a great movie, but it stands out because of that very reason.
Right.
But yeah, aside from that, you know, Missing in Action or, you know, one of the Chuck Norris movies are probably one of the first that I saw.
Yeah, I think the first one I saw was Enter the Ninja. I mean, I think that's the first one that I remember. And the reason I say that is because every time to this day, when I see the Cannon Film Group logo, I think of Enter the Ninja automatically.
Yeah.
So I think that was probably the first one that I saw. Obviously, I saw that on video. And it's also funny that MGM ended up distributing Cannon movies in the early to mid 80s.
Right.
They started, you know, so they're kind of put together now. But the CEO, Yablans, I forget his first name, but his last name was Yablans, the CEO of MGM at the time, had pretty much nothing good to say about Cannon and Golan and Globus in this documentary.
Right.
I mean, there's a whole ton of stuff we could talk about in this movie, I guess. I mean, their first really big, quote-unquote, Hollywood movie was Death Wish 2.
Right.
So, obviously with Charles Bronson, directed by the director of the first one, Michael Winner, who...
Ugh.
By all accounts of this movie, is a complete character. You know, with a capital ass and a capital hole.
What a scumbag. If I could, on Death Wish 2, there's a lot of rape in that movie.
Right.
An excessive amount of rape. There's a segment of it where they show a talk show, and Michael Winter, and then there's a lady that's on the panel with him, and they're going back and forth about the controversial content of the movie, because a lot of that was banned in England. But she says, at the end of it, she says, it's obvious that you want to be sodomized. I hope that happens soon for you.
Oh, my God.
And I was just like, damn.
Ooh. It got chilly in there.
Yeah. And considering that line came from, a talk show in the 80s, that was pretty surprising.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think she's right. Because, the dude was fascinated with rape.
Well, and he was unapologetic about it.
Yeah.
There's even a snippet of an interview in the documentary where he says, like an on-set interview of one of the Death Wish sequels, where he says, oh, well, it's funny. Whenever they want something blown up, somebody killed or raped or whatever, they call me, and I'm such a nice chap. Like, I wonder why that is, with just a big goofy grin. And it's like...
This company was just as stable as scumbags, really. Golan and Globus themselves were awful. Especially Golan. He was cruel, and he was a misogynist, and he was just a terrible person.
Yeah.
The only thing I really admire about him is his passion and his drive about making movies, even as bad as they were.
Right.
But I really admire the fact that he just kept going, pushed himself to the limits, and pushed. But in that respect, he pushed everyone else to their limits too, and had no empathy for anyone.
Right. That story early on, they tell about one of the movies that they did in Israel, which I think it was called Tevye and His Seven Daughters or something like that. It was kind of a takeoff of Fiddler on the Roof. But they talked about how his wife had come to the set, and she brought one of their children with her, like a newborn, pretty much, just a baby.
Yeah.
And he was just like, all at once, Golan was just like, oh, the baby, give me the baby, give me the baby. And he put the baby in the basket, and he put it on the back of this wagon, this horse-drawn wagon. This guy was supposed to drive across this bridge. And the guy drives the wagon across the bridge, and the baby's jumping around and jostling around. And it seemed pretty obvious, according to one of the interviewees who was there, it seemed pretty obvious the baby was going to fall out of the wagon. And Golan's wife started to go for the child, and Golan grabbed her and said, don't do it during the shot. And this is told in the movie as kind of like, that's Menachem Golan.
Yeah. Not only could the baby have flown off of the back of the wagon, but it could also have been shaken into brain damage.
Yeah,
too.
yeah.
Awful.
Well, and there's the other story about, I forget which movie it was that they were, it wasn't Delta Force, I don't think. It was another movie. There was a movie that they were shooting, and they had a pilot that kept landing this plane. Was that Delta Force?
I think, no, it was before that. It was
before that.
Might have been one of the Mission movies.
Okay. So this pilot kept landing this plane and landing this plane and landing this plane. And after a while, the pilot's like, I've got to stop. Like, I'm tired. I have to stop doing this. And Golan took a gun from one of the soldiers who were there, pointed at the guy, and said, get back in the cockpit.
Yeah.
And do it again. And I don't know how you justify that.
Right.
And I think that there's this terrible myth that's come up in movies, especially since the 1970s, even though I think the 70s was a great decade for film.
Yeah.
I think the enfant terrible, or whatever French term it is, this director who will do whatever it takes, even if it means holding a gun to somebody's head or cutting his fingers off with a chainsaw, as Barbette Schroeder threatened Golan with later on. I mean,
kind of the William Friedkin argument, basically.
Yeah. I mean, I think that there are times Friedkin's done some stuff where I'm just kind of like, oh my God. I mean, even if the movies are high quality, it's hard to justify that.
Yeah.
Because even as you're introducing this great art into the world, you're also seeding mistrust. You're sowing mistrust.
Right.
And so I don't know. I mean, there are filmmakers that I really like that I look at and say, this guy's a great filmmaker, or this woman's a great film. Well, who am I kidding? It's always a man who's a great filmmaker, but is also a complete asshole.
Right.
And I don't know where the line is on that all the time. Like, I know I won't watch Woody Allen movies much anymore. I mean, I was never a huge Woody Allen fan anyway.
Me neither.
I always really just liked interiors, and that was pretty much it. But even that, I can't watch that movie anymore.
Yeah.
So I know that there is a line, but when you have these people who are kind of like, it's me against the world and I'll do anything to get this done, it's like, yeah, you can appreciate the passion, but where do you stop?
Right.
Where do you say, okay, I have to figure out what's best for the people that I'm working with? And there wasn't a lot of that in the Cannon Group.
No.
I mean, and there wasn't a lot of that in people that worked for the Cannon Group, like Michael Winner. I mean,
yeah,
he's probably public enemy number one when it comes to decency.
Right.
So if I weren't a man, I wonder if it would be as tough a question. Because some of these movies I really enjoy, right? Like Enter the Ninja, I really like it. It's not a great movie, but I like it.
Yeah.
I like Revenge of the Ninja, but there are things about them that I don't like. And I find watching this documentary, it puts in perspective the things that I don't like about them are the things that I also don't like about the people making them.
Yeah.
So it kind of like, for instance, they talked about Ninja 3, The Domination in this documentary. And Sam Furstenberg was the guy who directed both Revenge of the Ninja and Ninja 3. Revenge of the Ninja was his first action movie. I think we talked about that, as if you couldn't tell.
Yeah.
But Ninja 3, you know, it was a failure. And in the documentary, Furstenberg says in his interview, oh, well, we figured out that it was a failure because people couldn't see a woman as a ninja. They just weren't ready to see that, or they didn't want to see that.
The lead actor was Lucinda Dickey, and she was kind of a fledgling star in the 80s, I guess. She was in a few Cannon movies, including Breakin'.
And Breakin' 2.
Breakin' 2, Electric Boogaloo. But yeah, that was the excuse, is that, oh, people don't buy a woman as a ninja. It's like, or maybe they just don't like this stupid movie.
Or, yeah, maybe they don't like The Exorcist crossed with Flashdance, crossed with a ninja movie.
Right.
You know, I keep threatening this guy when we're not in the projection booth here. We're going to watch this movie. And we're probably going to watch it with another terrible Chuck Norris movie that, oddly, Cannon didn't make, I don't think, called Silent Rage. That's bad, but it's not nearly as
After
bad.
watching this documentary, I kind of feel like we have to watch Ninja 3 now.
It's really something.
We've got the first two. We might as well knock out the third while we're at it and
it's outlandish.
Wrap up the trilogy.
Outlandish. We'll have to take a look at that.
Yeah.
Speaking of Lucinda Dickey, though, one thing about this movie that I thought was interesting was that when they talked about the making of the movie Breakin' and how, was it like Golan or Globus, one of the two, I think it was Golan, had heard his daughter talking about breakdancing.
Yeah.
And it said, let's make a movie about breakdancing. And another movie company had a movie in production or in pre-production called Beat Street.
Yeah.
And so Golan basically said, we've got to make a breakdance movie. We've got to beat Beat Street to the theaters. And so they made Breakin'. And according to this documentary, and as I remember, you know, it was quite a thing at the time. I remember Breakin' being a very big thing. In fact, one of the 45s that I have still is...
There's no stopping.
Exactly. Yeah.
No stopping.
It was like Ollie and Jerry, I think.
Yeah.
I think it was Ollie and Jerry.
Yeah.
So it was kind of a big phenomenon. And it was one of the few times where the Cannon film model of, okay, it's January 14th. You've got to be in production by March 3rd, and you have Klaus Kinski, and we don't have a script or anything, so let's get going. You know?
Yeah.
And this Breakin' was one of the few times that actually worked, that they said, okay, this is what we need to do. This is what we need to get it out. Let's get it out there. And they did, and it was a hit.
Right.
But the problem was that this approach that they had only worked that one time, really. I mean, it wasn't like it worked every time out.
Yeah.
But they just did it every time out. And ultimately, that's what ended up getting them into trouble, is that they would have 50 movies in production or whatever. I thought it was funny how they had all these stacked interview clips in the documentary in that one run where people were saying they had 42 films in production a year, 47, 52, 868, I don't know. Like, they had all these movies. One guy said that one day Golan said something about this movie they were shooting in Budapest. He's like, what are you talking about? And Golan's like, oh, we've been shooting a movie in Budapest for like 2 weeks. It's like in the second week of production. And nobody had any idea about it, or at least most of the people in the company didn't have any idea about it, really.
Right.
So
it's also funny how these numbers inflate during this this documentary. It's like Sylvester Stallone, he made 12 million, 15 million, 18 million, 20 million, 25 million.
Yeah.
And then later on, it's like they had 48 movies in 1 year. They had 49, 50, 52. There was like a movie a week. And it's just like, wow, okay. There's a lot of revisionist history going on here.
This documentary is kind of like this. Chronology is completely weird, but it also kind of slips in and out of talking about an individual actor's salary with a budget for a film, right? So like when they made Over the Top, Golan's kind of like, we need a big star. I want to make a movie with Stallone. It's going to be bigger than Rocky, and it's going to be about an arm wrestling truck driver. Sounds amazing, right? Let's just, take my money. Actually, I did see that movie in the theater, I'm not going to lie. But
it's because Terry Funk was in it. That's why you saw it.
Absolutely. She's all Charlie. So, So Stallone, I guess the pitch though was that Golan went to Stallone's agent, and his agent said, "Our client would work for you for $10 million."
Yeah,
and Golan's kind of like, "Well, what about $12 million?" And so then they were kind of like, "Oh, okay."
Yeah,
and I think the budget for that whole movie overall was like $25 million.
And they were talking about how that deal changed the structure as far as salary for lead actors was concerned.
Right.
And it's like, well, that really wasn't a good thing.
No,
because those salaries can, end up hampering a lot of movies.
Yeah, it really did. I mean, you could argue if you're, well, I don't know. I can't even go that far. I can't even make the argument without really feeling grimy about it. I mean, some people will say, well, look what we did. Like there was the independent film industry that grew up in the 90s precisely because a lot of people who otherwise maybe would have been able to do some independent movies stepped up and said, oh, well, I'm getting a little bit of traction and I want the money that Stallone's getting, or I want to get closer to what Stallone's getting.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, maybe that's not a good comparison though, because I don't know. I think the thing, Canada makes all these conversations so difficult because they were a B movie factory.
Yeah.
Right? They were like the irresponsible version in almost every way possible of a Roger Corman studio, of New World Pictures. And so they make all these conversations really difficult because you're taking Sylvester Stallone and basically putting him into a really expensive B movie.
Right.
Right? So then it is kind of hard to say, well, the fact that this movie was one of the movies that really changed the pay structure in Hollywood and kind of up the ante when it came to getting pay for a lead actor. At the same time, he's in a B movie. So when you talk about independent cinema, you're like, well, yeah, but pretty much anybody in independent cinema could have gotten almost anybody else that was in a Cannon movie except for maybe Chuck Norris.
Yeah.
I think Charles Bronson probably still, well, I don't know. The way they made Charles Bronson sound, maybe even he wouldn't have been in an independent movie at that time because they were saying at one point in the doc that he was being driven in a Jaguar from his trailer to the set, which was like actually like 6 feet. So,
okay.
Yeah, maybe that guy, he might have been good fodder for like Living in Oblivion or something, but maybe he wouldn't have been actually on a movie set, an independent movie set. So I don't know. Cannon blurs a lot of lines. I have 2 questions I want to consider here.
Okay.
And really what made me think of this was Shabba-Doo, one of the leads from Breakin', something he said when they were talking about Breakin' in this documentary. He said that Breakin' brought all these cultures together and it did something that the UN couldn't. Right? And I was kind of like, okay, I mean, great.
What was that?
Say that one. Like the United Nations? Is that what you're talking about? Okay. So here are 2 questions that I have.
Mm-hmm.
Number 1, what would foreign policy be like if the American foreign policy, right?
If it were ran by Shabba-Doo?
Well, no. See, you're messing it up. See, that's what you do. That's why we don't go swimming together anymore. I see the big dark blue pool rise up around you. No, the question you know what? I'll take a little bit of the blame because I was taking a while to get to the question.
Okay.
So the question is, what would American foreign policy be like if the Cannon Group had never gotten into business with Chuck Norris? Invasion USA, Delta Force, the Missing in Action movies, to a lesser extent, the Missing in Action movies. But
it's definitely increased military spending.
Well, but if you think about it, like there are some politicians, especially in the lead up to the Iraq War in 2003, pretty much every scenario you were getting on television when it came to news and justification for that war, or the justification for torture in interrogations was, well, what if we have a terrorist who knows where a bomb is and we have to torture him to get that information before thousands or millions of people are killed? Right. And it's kind of like, okay, so that's last week's episode of 24.
Yeah.
That's not reality most of the time.
Yeah.
And if the bomb's about ready to blow up, if they're not going to give you the information, they're not going to give it to you. Right? Like if they know it's going to blow up within 30 minutes or 24 hours or whatever. But it harkens back to movies like the Chuck Norris movies under the Cannon Group. And it's probably, the connection's tenuous. I'm not saying that it's rock solid, right? It's not like this theory that I'm going to go out and write a book about.
Yeah.
But I wonder, the other question I have, I want to ask both questions and then I want your sage answers. The other question I have is, what would the modern film industry as far as blockbusters look like if the Cannon Group had never existed in the form of the Golden Globus Cannon Group?
Right.
What would the Avengers movies look like? What would superhero movies look like in general?
Yeah.
What would action movies look like? So I'll sit back and listen to your thoughts.
That's a good question, because they did definitely set a tone of what those movies in the 80s, as far as what action movies would continue to be. And, there are a lot of action movies that are still being made that are very similar to some of those bad canon movies of the 80s.
Right.
So yeah, that's a good question. I mean,
some of those movies are being made by people who worked for Canon too, right? Like New Image.
Yeah.
What is it?
Olympus Has Fallen.
Yeah. I think
movies.
those guys are Canon alumni, and I think they were talking in the documentary about how they learned the lessons of what Canon did wrong, and were applying those lessons to making the movies that they make.
And those movies are big hits. I've seen the first one. I think Olympus Has Fallen is the first one. I've seen that.
Right.
It's fine. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely still a lot of dumb action movies that are coming out on the regular that have got to be highly influenced by the Canon movies for sure.
Well, I think the question then becomes, did the Canon films not so much warp the movie industry in general, but did it warp our expectations of what an action movie is or could be as a movie-going public? You know what I mean? Because now when somebody says, okay, this is an action movie, you automatically think, oh, the story's not going to be very good, the characterization's not going to be very good, the acting's going to be either overwrought or terrible, and then there's going to be an explosion every 3 minutes.
Right.
So if there were no Cannon Group, would there have been Transformer movies?
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, what's the expectation?
I think there's a lot of truth in that.
You think so?
I think Michael Bay created a career off of watching those old Cannon movies.
Yeah, probably.
I think he owes a lot to them.
Probably.
Yeah, I think you're right. And it seems like the action movies that come out that are very, very good are ones that are well written and have some good character development in them, like Sicario and that sort of thing.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, even the Avengers movies, I think are well done. I know you're not a huge Marvel fan, but I think the Marvel movies in general are all very well done. They're all very watchable, and the effects are top notch. But would they
be as quippy? I wonder.
Yeah.
I mean, the comics I think are a little like that. What I know of the comics.
Yeah.
But I wonder, there's a certain kind of action film quippiness.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
Like I told you, we saw Delta Force when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And for a couple of months after that, my mom would say goodnight by looking at me and saying Chuck Norris's line where he shoots the guy under the bed.
He's hiding under a bed.
Yeah. What did he say? It was like,
"Goodnight, sucker."
Yeah, "Goodnight, sucker." She would say that to me.
Yeah.
It's not even a very good line, but
Right.
but it's like it was just quippy enough. I mean,
Yeah.
you think of the 80s as being the Make My Day decade.
Yeah.
Which I think even maybe Reagan said that at one point when talking to a foreign leader. or talking about a foreign leader, giving a speech aimed at a foreign leader. So it's like, I don't know. I always wonder things like that because I think sometimes we feel like, okay, an action movie is here and movies in general are here and they don't really have any effect on how our society develops. They're just what we go and do on Friday night or Saturday night or whatever.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Sometimes you look at this stuff and when you get to look back on a decade or 2 decades or 3 decades of movies and kind of put that on a line that's parallel with the timeline of historical events or public opinion or public attitude or just the basic like emotional climate in a country, sometimes things match up in really weird ways.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I mean, those canon movies, I mean, they definitely had a template of sorts. I mean, some of them were just off the rails, but you know, there was definitely explosions, definitely nudity, definitely stupid lines that influenced other movies even of that same decade, you know?
Yeah.
Commando was not a canon film, but I mean, that movie could have been a canon movie, you know?
Right.
Let off some steam, Bennett. You know?
Right. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
What happened to him? I let him go. Yeah.
Right.
Just, yeah. I mean, and a lot of, you know, the other big action stars of that decade, Stallone, Van Damme, all of those movies had a lot of what canon had created in them.
Right.
So how that continued over the decades, yeah, I think action movies in general since that point have owed a lot to the canon film group. And
as does mashup culture.
Yeah.
Right? Because pretty much every one of their films was this crossed with this, crossed with this.
Yes.
And that's always been kind of a Hollywood cliche, but these guys took it to a point that was, I mean, well, Ninja 3 is a prime example of irresponsibility, you know, because it's one thing to say, okay, I want to do this cross with this, like Die Hard cross with Air Bud. Well, nobody would think that's a good idea, right? I mean, who would think that's a good idea? We don't want to have a dog crawling around in a heating vent. You know what I mean? Like, nobody wants to do that to a poor puppy.
Sure.
These guys, though, were irresponsible in the way that, like, the Sahara movie that they made, and I think that seemed like, at least according to this documentary, that was one of the first films that they made once MGM agreed to distribute their movies.
Yeah.
And it was what? It was supposed to be...
Their Lawrence of Arabia.
Lawrence of Arabia crossed with Blue Lagoon, crossed with The Amazing Race, or... Yeah, like
The Great Race.
The Great Race or something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, insanity.
Yeah.
Right? Like, yeah. And even those, well, aside from Blue Lagoon, like the other two movies, yeah, I could see how you could fit those together, but you throw Blue Lagoon in and immediately my head kind of turns like a boxer puppy. I just don't understand how.
The only Blue Lagoon reference I could see, you know, I've not seen the movie, but just based off of the documentary is Brooke Shields and a wet T-shirt. So
yeah, right.
You know,
right. And she's probably stranded somewhere, which I think Blue Lagoon. I don't.
At some point, she's got to be stranded. Yeah. So
I want to talk about a few random movies, if we can,
yeah.
Before we close this out, because there's a few random movies that I saw clips of in this documentary that really brought it all back.
Yeah.
The first one I want to talk about is Hercules with Lou Ferrigno. Good Lord.
Punching a bear into outer space.
Yeah. I love how he was fighting an obviously fake bear.
Yes.
A bear that a guy in a bear suit that basically looked like if you hired a dude to come to your kid's 5th birthday party and he showed up in this bear costume, your kid would go to his or her room and close the door and refuse to come out because it would look so stupid.
Yeah.
So Ferrigno's beating the shit out of this fake bear, but they've intercut it with footage of a real bear every once in a while. So you see a close-up of a real bear going, rawr, you know, and then they go back to Ferrigno beating the hell out of this fake bear. And then, of course, hitting him or throwing him into outer space.
Yeah. This is definitely not a Revnik quality bear versus man.
No,
not at all.
Oh, it's an amazing movie. I saw that movie in the theater. I was a huge Lou Ferrigno fan because I love The Incredible Hulk.
Sure.
So I was confused when I heard his voice in the movie because it was dubbed because he's a deaf man and I knew that he was deaf as a child. I mean, it wasn't a secret that I really remember. I think I read it in Starlog or something like that. And so I wanted to go see this movie. And even I thought the bear thing, I was kind of like, I don't know here. That was what, 1982 probably? Yeah. So I was about probably 9. And I was kind of like, I don't know about the bear. You know? So, or driving the chariot through space.
There's that, yeah.
Yeah.
And if you've got the power to punch a bear and knock it into outer space, there's really no fight there at all, is there? I mean,
not really. How does that? Yeah, I don't even know how that. How that?
Oh, there's a bear. SWAT gone.
Yeah. How that balances out. That seems like a horrible imbalance against the bear. But he didn't know. He didn't know how tall the deck was stacked against it.
No kidding.
Another movie that I wanted to talk about, which I actually thought this showed some real smarts on the part of Cannon.
Yeah.
Was the missing in action situation.
Yeah.
So
crazy.
So the documentary, they talk about the missing in action movies with Chuck Norris, right?
Yeah.
And they say that Missing in Action 2 was actually made first. And it's more akin to what I would have associated at the time with a Chuck Norris movie. There was a big martial arts fight at the end, and there was a lot of action and yada yada yada.
Yeah.
And he was in a prisoner of war camp, right?
Yeah.
So they shoot this movie, and then they immediately say, well, he's here, like we're still in the Philippines or whatever. Let's go ahead and shoot a sequel right now. So they shoot the sequel right then. Well, then I think it was Golan, right? Was it Golan that looked at both movies and said,
yeah,
well, the first movie really sucks. It's poorly shot. He doesn't look comfortable, and the acting's not good. So either Golan said this or somebody said to Golan, hey, well, let's do this. The sequel, at the time, Missing in Action, was better. And if they put that movie out first, it would actually drive business for a sequel, which would have been what would have been number 1, now became number 2, and number 2 became number 1, basically. So then what ended up happening was they released Missing in Action, and it does pretty well. And they released Missing in Action 2, which is actually now positioned as a prequel.
That was very savvy.
And I was telling you, at the time, I remember seeing Missing in Action in the theater.
Yeah.
And then within a couple of weeks, no more than 6 weeks, I remember looking in the paper again on like a Wednesday or a Thursday and saying to my dad, oh, look, there's another Missing in Action movie at the theater. And him saying, no, we just saw that one, last week or whatever. And say, no, this is Missing in Action 2. And he'd look at it, well, so we went to see it. And I remember seeing those movies within weeks of each other.
Yeah.
Not within like a year or whatever. Which, looking at this documentary, I think kind of feels like the MO of the Cannon Group, and that they couldn't wait.
Right.
Because most movie companies would probably say, let's do Missing in Action. Let's let it come out on video. Let's see what kind of legs it has. Even though at that time there wasn't really the sell-through market. So, I don't think the sell-through market really took hold until like maybe the late 80s, really mid to late 80s. So you had the rental market.
Yeah.
But instead of waiting, they were just like, no, let's just put these out.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Because nowadays, as soon as a movie comes out, somebody's made a fan trailer and put it up on YouTube for the sequel. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, it's always kind of like that.
Right.
So that, I remember in the 80s, was a very kind of jarring experience as a moviegoer, because you never expected to see things that quickly or to see some sort of follow-up that quickly.
Another smart moment that they had, I'd like to talk about Invasion USA.
Yeah, please.
This was all about timing, and they nailed the timing on this one.
Yeah.
So the Atlanta airport, as most of you probably know, largest airport in the country. It's so big that it has its own zip code, and that's not an exaggeration. It really does. I've been to the Atlanta airport, and I've had to walk from one gate to the other in one hallway for 20 straight minutes, and it never ended. And the hallway just kept going.
You're like Lee Marvin in Point Blank.
I know. It blew my mind. I was like, man, this hallway never ends. So yeah, huge airport. So when they were expanding the airport to make it the behemoth that it is, they bought pretty much a town to destroy so they could create more runways. So they were planning on dozing an entire neighborhood and a shopping mall and everything else. Golden Globus got wind of this, and they struck up a deal with Atlanta to where they would let them basically film a war in that area that was going to be destroyed so they could blow up houses. They destroyed a shopping mall, they got a got a truck driving through a shopping mall, going through windows, going through walls, just destroying the joint. That was awesome.
Yeah, yeah.
That's such a great movie story right there. The movie's not that great, but the story behind it is fascinating. I mean, that's so cool that they actually just got to destroy whatever they wanted. It was kind of like in, was it Con Air?
Yeah.
Where at the end of the movie, they got to destroy a casino that was going to be imploded anyway. So just great timing on these sorts of things.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny, Invasion USA was one of the movies that they had this one screenwriter, and I'm sorry, I don't remember his name. But he had two or three different movies that he talked about that he had written for canon.
Yeah.
And that was one of them, and he was saying how much smarter his script was than the movie that they ended up putting out. And I'm just kind of like, ain't that the way, bud? I mean, I imagine he's probably right.
Right.
But then again, everybody thinks that the script that they write is the smartest, funniest version of whatever the movie is supposed to be. One other movie I want to talk about that the Canon Group made that I will forever be their mortal enemy for making, and that's Superman 4.
Yeah.
The Quest for Peace.
You think that Batman and Robin is the worst superhero movie ever made?
Wow.
No.
The writer of the movie, Mark Rosenthal, is very kind to them in this movie. I mean, he's very nice to them.
Yeah.
But he does say at one point that even though they ruined our movie, he still likes them. I think he says that kind of in the opening of the documentary when everybody's like saying something nice but couched with something really bad about Golden Globus or about canon in general. But I remember at the time that movie came out, because I was probably like 13, 14 when that movie came out. And I remember reading about it and reading a novelization of it that was based more on the screenplay, I think, than it was on the movie that came out. So, you know, they still do novelizations, I think, of movies or some movies. But sometimes, like back in the day, the novelizations of the movies would actually add a whole bunch of story that wasn't on screen.
Yeah.
So like the novelization for the original Halloween did that. The novelization for Star Trek The Motion Picture did that. Alien, that novelization did that. A lot of times they were written by Alan Dean Foster. I think 2 of the 3 I mentioned were written by Alan Dean Foster, maybe all 3 of them. But I remember, I think there was a novelization for Superman 4, and there actually was like this whole other subplot where there was a failed nuclear man. And he was played by, I want to say the actor's name was Clive Mantle. And it was a pretty good story. Like, this guy was a failure, and Lex Luthor kind of cast him aside or whatever. And so basically you have this kind of Frankenstein's monsters who has powers of his own, although they're kind of unreliable, and he's cast aside. And then there's this other nuclear man. And I think the original prototype nuclear man played some part in the ending. It was a much better story than what Canon ended up putting on film.
Yeah.
But mostly, I think the reason was because they were running out of money at that point. Because what was their deal at that point financially? When they started that movie, did they owe somebody like $90 million?
Something like that,
Something insane. And so the budget for Superman 4 went from, what, $30 million down to 17.
Yeah.
So it was like...
And they were talking about how bad the special effects were in that movie too, and how, you know, you could see the ridges of the characters' bodies against the green screen and all of that.
Yeah. Well,
terrible.
And that, I think, was a hallmark of Canon films. Like, if you look at a Canon film, you could always tell if it was a Canon film by the blue screen, green screen sequences.
Absolutely.
Because you would say, oh, there's the little purple line around the people. That's definitely a Canon movie.
If you've ever seen Land of the Lost.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's your Canon
or
films.
Life Force, or Hercules, or every single one, pretty much.
Canon had nothing to do with Land of the Lost, but all their movies look like Land of the Lost.
Yeah, they all really do.
Yeah.
In fact, Land of the Lost probably had better special effects.
Maybe.
I mean, we gripe about them looking like video. I mean, I do anyway. Gripe about them special effects looking too much like video games nowadays. At some points, like some of the Spider-Man movies to me just look too unreal to be compelling.
Yeah.
I think that's why the newest ones are so good, because I think the special effects look better and the stories are so good.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, the Purple Ridge was definitely a Canon special. I guess the other thing I thought of when looking at this movie was Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. which I know is one of your favorite films of all time.
The screaming, man. Just the screaming. If it wasn't for the excessive screaming by Carolyn Williams, bless her heart, she's great, but the excessive screaming, I could never watch that again because of that. But aside from that, I mean, I thought it was pretty funny and had a lot of really great gore and that sort of thing, but just the screaming, oh my God.
It was kind of interesting to see some of the movies Tobe Hooper was making in the 80s.
Yeah.
Because they had clips and they talked about Life Force, Invaders from Mars, and Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. And it seemed like all these movies were his choice versus them being Cannon's choice and then Hooper doing what they wanted him to do. But all of his movies in this time period seemed to kind of line up with the Cannon credo of mishmashing genres and styles together.
Yeah. Which is a shame too, because all these movies came after Poltergeist, and for my money, Poltergeist is a perfect horror movie.
Yeah.
And how much Steven Spielberg played into the direction of that movie, I don't know. It looks very Spielbergian.
Yeah.
But he was a producer on it. But aside from that, I mean, Tobe Hooper was billed as a director of that movie, so you got to give him credit for it. But these movies afterward, I mean, which one was it? Invaders from Mars.
Uh-huh.
There are a couple of shots with the kid and everything that kind of had that Poltergeist feel to it.
Uh-huh.
But then the monsters were just like...
They were something like from a 50s sci-fi movie or something.
Right.
Which I think was his idea.
Yeah.
Texas Chainsaw Massacre was probably like his first big splash, obviously.
Yeah.
But then, he did do something like Eaten Alive pretty much right after Texas Chainsaw, or pretty close in there. And that was kind of a stylized version of Texas Chainsaw Massacre in a swamp, But it's felt like kind of a dry run then for Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, because it did have more humor and it was very kind of artificial in the way it was presented, more so than Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
And he also did Salem's Lot and The Funhouse, which are both also very good.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then he did Poltergeist, and after that, it was kind of downhill for him.
Yeah, I mean, I like Invaders from Mars, but you either have to see it when you're at the age that he was when he was kind of affected by the movies of the 1950s or whatever that inspired him to make that movie, or you just have to know what you're getting going in. Know that it's going to be kind of a mishmash of styles, it's going to be a mishmash of genres, and you just kind of have to work that out as a viewer on your own and see if that's for you or if it's not for you. But
yeah,
I don't know. I mean, as far as like in this movie, they were kind of like, oh, well, it should have been more serious because it should have been about kids mistrusting their parents. And it's like, well, I don't know. I mean, Bob Balaban made Parents, which was about that. And that was, to me, very stylized as well.
Yeah.
I think that's a great movie. I mean, I really love that movie. And so I don't know. I don't know if they're right or if Hooper's right or what. I mean, Life Force I did not dig, really.
Mm-hmm.
It just wasn't my thing. So I mean, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 I really like. So.
Well, in 1995, Tobe did do his magnum opus, The Mangler.
That's one of the best movies ever made.
If you haven't seen The Mangler, it's about a laundry folding machine that gets possessed by a demon.
Yeah, well, and it's one of the few movies I've ever fallen asleep during while sober in a movie theater.
You and I saw that one together, and that was a running joke for us for years and years and years.
Yeah.
How bad that movie is.
If a movie was bad, we'd say, well, it's not The Mangler.
Right.
Yeah, right. Would you recommend this documentary to somebody to watch?
Sure. Yeah, I mean...
sure. Okay.
It's a fun documentary to watch. It's all over the place, and it is exhausting because it is non-stop dialogue and quick edits between interviews with people and clips from movies. It doesn't let up, you know, and it's an hour and 45 minutes or something.
Right.
And it never stops. So it's exhausting.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, it was hard to take notes on this movie while it was going because it was going so fast that if you looked away for a little bit, you're going to miss something. And they would jump to a story about this movie, a story about that movie, a story about Golden and Globus, and all these stories were interesting. So you didn't want to look away. So I had moments where I just shut the computer down because I couldn't just keep up.
Yeah. And I think too, I think one thing that I wish I would have known going in is that the chronology was going to kind of be all over the place. Because at the beginning, they start kind of talking about, okay, this is what canon was before Golan and Globus got into it.
Yeah.
And this is what Golan and Globus were doing prior to getting into it. And then from there, it gets a little murky as to what the chronology is. And like I think we were talking about, the demise of this company comes up 3 different times with 3 different movies.
Yeah.
In pretty quick succession. So you're kind of thinking, okay, you said this movie was the beginning of the end for this, but then you say this movie was the beginning of the end, and that second movie came before the first movie.
Right.
So what's happening here? I don't. And they bring in Michael Milken,
And
which
how many beginnings does an end have?
Yeah, exactly. Well,
Right.
and they brought in Michael Milken into the conversation, but I never quite understood if he was actually their main source of funding. I never understood exactly how he fit into their whole financing thing, because when they first introduced him into the story, I thought, oh, so maybe they lost money in the whole, like, whatever. He was involved in, like, some savings and loan scandal or junk bonds or something like that. And I thought maybe they lost money in that. But then it seemed like the documentary never really got back to that. So I don't know what he had to do with it.
And then they hired a mobster as their CEO, and that's what split Golan and Globus apart. And
Right. They hired like this con man from Italy who they thought was going to come in and right the ship, but he was just basically a con artist who was up on some sort of criminal charges in Italy.
Yeah.
And Globus ended up staying with him, and Golan said, I'm not going to be in business with the devil. And I'm like, have you met Michael Winter, sir?
Right.
But
or your cousin, for that matter.
Yeah, but then they parted ways, and then that's when Golan started 21st Century Films or something like that.
Yeah.
Which I think they might have made that Robert Englund Phantom of the Opera movie, which I kind of like that movie.
Did you?
Yeah, I thought it was okay. I mean, I kind of like the Phantom of the Opera just about every iteration, so I don't really care. I think they also made The Mask of the Red Death, which I thought was kind of an interesting movie at the time. Those are the kind of movies that in the Midwest would just kind of show up at your movie theater and would be there for like a week and then go away.
Yeah.
And so by the time I was driving a car, I would see every movie that the movie theater had to offer. And there were times that you'd have a week where I've seen everything at the movie theaters, but, The Mask of the Red Death comes up. Oh, I kind of know that story. I'll go see that, know? So the Phantom of the Opera was kind of like that. I think it was only at our local theaters for like 2 weeks or something. I mean, it wasn't there for very long. So, but yeah.
So I guess I would, I'd recommend it.
A hearty recommendation from Ryan.
No, it's fun. It's a fun documentary to watch, and the stories are just outlandish.
What would
sometimes you don't know what's a true story and what isn't, but yeah, it's fun.
It's kind of like Hollywood.
Yeah.
Do you think a person would have to be familiar with a couple of the canon movies to enjoy the documentary? Or could you see somebody who has never seen a canon movie that they know of springing this on them?
I think if you like movies at all, it will be interesting to you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you've even seen one canon movie, then you kind of have an idea what most of them are like.
Right.
And so it would, for that reason alone, it'd be interesting too. So yeah, I think you have to enjoy movies, and really you may even have to enjoy bad movies to really enjoy this documentary.
Right.
But yeah, if you're a movie fan, it's worth watching for sure.
Yeah.
But don't play in your afternoon.
Yeah.
Because when it's over, you're going to want a nap.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Oh, yeah. I think it's about time to go take a nap.
No kidding.
All right. Well, it's a half-hearted recommendation.
Yeah. It's a Rembrandt.
If Rembrandt's walking around naked, it is a Rembrandt. 'Cause only if Rembrandt is associated with a canon film, you'd have to be naked.
And while we're at that, last point to make here. So the filmmakers tried to get Golan and Globus to do interviews for this movie, and they refused. And they ended up making their own documentary and released it 3 months before Electric Boogaloo was released.
Yeah, that movie's hard to get a hold of, though. It's called The Go-Go Boys. You can buy it on
Yeah.
Amazon, but you can't stream it anywhere.
Yeah, there's a great app that I go to, and you do as well, called Just Watch, where you can type in a movie and it will tell you where it's streaming and if it's free or if you have to pay for it or what have you. That movie was not even on the app.
No.
Not even, because I thought, man, if they did their own documentary, I kind of want to see that, but
you know what
nowhere to be found.
You know what is available to streaming, though? They talk about this in the documentary, and I suggest everybody go see this right away. Cannon's answer to the movie Tommy, called The Apple. It is streaming on Amazon Prime right now. You should just go take a look at that. Don't even, you know what? Don't even watch this documentary before you do it. Just go watch that movie.
Just go watch it.
And see what you can get out of it.
I haven't seen the movie, but everything I saw in the documentary, it probably should be seen.
It does star Catherine Mary Stewart in her first film role, which is, she's one of our favorites.
We love you.
Night of the Comet. Every time her name is mentioned, Night of the Comet comes up, and that's got a special glass case or the projection booth.
She's in a really great teen sex comedy called Mischief, too, which I love that movie.
Yeah.
It's got a young Kelly Preston in it, and it stars Doug McKeon, who is Nancy McKeon's brother, Nancy that played Joe on Facts of Life.
Yeah.
That's a great movie. It's set in the late 50s, and really cool movie, really good movie.
I don't know if I've ever seen that.
Oh, it's worth it.
I'll have to take a look at it.
That one's, I believe that one's on Prime right now as well. So.
Whoa.
Yeah.
We're selling the big beast today.
That's right.
The devil beast.
Get your subscription. Get your money in order.
Give us your password. Once you get your subscription, or give us your password.
That's right. You can find us at All Night Drive-In Picture Show at gmail.com.
We will order tons of blow-up dolls from Japan, we promise. We only did that one time, and that was because Stubbs got a hold of somebody's password, but we've learned to keep him.
Speaking of a stable of scumbags. Shoo.
Hey, don't talk about the ticket takers anymore, man. They don't like that. They don't. I mean, we were shut down for a week after you did that last time. Just stop it.
All right.
Okay?
Sorry, Stubbs.
No more.
All right.
Coming soon to this drive-in theater.
Next week, we have a birthday surprise for one of our listeners named Nathan. And guess what we're giving him? The Necronomicon. We're going to watch Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2 Dead by Dawn. That's it for the short reel this week. You can connect with us by following us on social media at All Night Drive-In on Twitter and Instagram, by searching the All Night Drive-In Picture Show on Facebook, and by emailing us at allnightdriveinpictureshow@gmail.com. Please subscribe to and rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts or on your favorite podcatcher if possible. And more importantly, tell your friends. Sneaking your friends into the show in the trunk is definitely allowed at the All Night Drive-In Picture Show. I mean, Stubbs probably won't like it, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. So we'll see you next week on the All Night Drive-In Picture Show. Thanks for listening.
The Short Reel is edited and produced by Markham Harvey. Our theme song is by Burning Mirror and edited by The Night Watch. I'm your announcer, Lila Pseudonym. This has been a Clown Business Coalition production. Thank you and good night.